Welcome back to the Wolf of Queen Street podcast series. Welcome back to the audio podcast or the video series. But today, before we get into the episode, I just want to do a shout out to my sponsors, JobSearchQOD.com. Job Search Queensland can help you find your ideal job. And if you're struggling to find the ideal job around your CV problems and anything else that is a stress in the current market about looking for jobs, what you should send and what you should say to recruiters for companies, then you should reach out to JobSearchQOD.com, as they are the best in providing you the guidance to find your next job. But today I've got Karen Goss on the show. He's been on my podcast before. He's done a few live videos with me, and we're always talking about something unique, different that most people don't think about. And that's why I love having Karen back on the show. And, you know, Karen, if you don't know his background, is a futurist entrepreneur that looks at empowering people about living freely, doing awesome, and just doing things differently to how most people think it. Karen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Lawrence. Great to be back.
So Karen released a video only about a month or 2 months ago, and I went on YouTube, I had a watch of it, and I thought, man, this is something really cool, and this is something really interesting. And what the video fundamentally was about is how blockchain is going to affect or possibly affect the real estate and property market from here on forward. And I said to Karen, I want him to come over to the show so we can talk about those points so people can understand fundamentally blockchain itself and how it can change our lives around property.
Definitely. And I mean, I actually say, right, if you're into property, if you want to know what happens next, I am a futurist. I think blockchain is going to be the biggest disruptor in all of property and all of real estate. And it's definitely something anyone in that property space really needs to know. It's actually funny, Lawrence, because 4 years ago, 5-6 years ago now, here in New Zealand, there's the annual Property Investors Conference put on by the NZPIF, and it was held in Auckland, and I actually got asked to be on a panel. So I represented the young investor. We had a middle-aged investor and an older investor, and one of the questions was, what do you think is going to happen in the market? Pretty boring, age-old question. Who bloody knows? Yep. But I actually said, I was like, if you're just focused on what's going to happen on the market, is the market going to go up? Is it going to go down? You're completely missing the huge bloody tsunami which is coming in, which is all the technology which is disrupting the property market as you know it. And I actually have a feeling when, this was filmed February 2021, I have a feeling this is sort of the year. I think this is the first year that we're going to see a lot of the technology really starting to disrupt the property industry. It will probably start slowly at first, but the next coming decade, if someone watches this in 10 years time, they'll be like, well, duh, of course that's how it
Well, yeah, no, it's like if you tell teenagers now, there wasn't Uber before, or take an Uber, what's an Uber? And like, what are you talking about? It's this sort of moment. So, but before we get back really into the details, to anyone that's listening at the moment, people will be aware of blockchain and they'll be aware of what they think of what is Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all that sort of stuff. So we're not going down on the currency side. We're talking about the technology that underpins this. And I'll let Karen sort of have a little chat about explaining fundamentally in a simple way, as simple as we can be, what is blockchain.
Yeah, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert on blockchain. You can probably Google or YouTube better explanations. For me, it's about being a futurist, being a generalist, not a specialist. But the way I'd explain it, you touched on Bitcoin or Ethereum. So it's the technology which is built under that. And it's almost like they call it the internet of distrust, right? At the moment, for example, I could rip this, I could just copy this podcast and pass it off as my own, right? But once it's built on the blockchain, it's actually physically impossible to do that. And that's why cryptocurrencies work, because I can't copy a coin. I can only give you the coin. So the way it works is, imagine there's 100 people and I give you a $100 note, and 51 of those people say, okay, that $100 note used to be owned by Karen, now it's owned by Lawrence. That's essentially what blockchain is. It's blocks of information stored in a chain, which are all ratified by hundreds of thousands of servers around the world. And if I wanted to lie, or if I wanted to steal that $100 back from you, I would have to convince 51 of those people to say, actually, no, it's my money, which is almost impossible.
Correct.
That's probably my best explanation of it. It's a ledger system where you have independent ledgers verifying that something took place.
It's a great explanation, and I love the you're talking about giving the money, and it's proves whether it's there. So yeah, it totally is that in the sense of the blockchain. It's kept in the history of that. And one of the coolest things, and I think we'll get into it in a little bit around blockchain and technologies, is a lot of times when we do things today, if I get something else is removed. So if I give Karen that $100 we're talking about, physically, I'll give him there's no history other than that Karen's got the $100 now that it was mine. So look, he's taken it out of my hand. But on blockchain, it always keeps that history. It always keeps that information behind. So we can go back and go, this $100 went from Karen, came to me. I got given it from my wife. I don't want to say my wife because she's not going to give me money, but okay, I got it from my friend, and so forth. So you can keep that history, and that's where something that's really cool about it, and sort of all that knowledge and stuff that sits behind on blockchain. But the first thing I wanted to get into, and what Karen covered off on his video, was the benefit of in property is we've got something called titles. It's pretty much a piece of paper which says I own, or I partly own, or I have some part of this piece of land or building and so forth, depending on what the stipulation on the title is. And you're talking about, Karen, that blockchain could remove this capability of us having sort of no more physical titles.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm here in New Zealand, you're here in New Zealand. We actually already have quite an advanced property ownership system. I mean, how many properties do you own? You've never actually received a physical title either, right? Yeah. And that's because it's all owned, it's all held within the government. And we had to go through a middleman, which is our lawyers and Land Information New Zealand, in order to see or prove property ownership, right? But for a lot of developing countries, Indonesia, for example, they don't have any of that. So you have to have an actual piece of paper which says you own that property. And if you don't have that, you don't own the property. And I literally know someone, it is nuts, someone living in Bali who had the title stolen from him. I mean, you're from South Africa. I don't know what it is there, but this thing probably happens all the time there too, right?
No, we don't. We're not that far behind from the last time I checked, right? So there could have been a stage. Okay. Well, other things get stolen in South Africa, but not titles. Not in that way. Well,
got to throw out a bit of slight racism there, hey? But we'll go back to Indonesia then. So yeah, so my friend in Bali owned this land, his family's owned it forever, had the title, someone broke into his house, stole his title, absolutely nothing he can do because he no longer owns that property. Now, if that was stored on the blockchain, it would be impossible to steal, which means there is absolute proof that it is his property. He doesn't need a piece of paper. It could literally just be like a document on the internet, but because it is stored on the blockchain, no one can take it, which means therefore it is absolutely your property. So I think that's the first way we'll start to see things going. And I don't know what countries there are, but I have heard there are countries starting to do that now. Not your stock standards, you know, America, New Zealand, Australia, Britain, like, you know, our ministers and stuff already think we're too far advanced. But you know, I think this is where a lot of bunny ears developing countries are going to start overtaking us, because we believe we're already advanced, and they're going to leapfrog us. Because I think that's the first place we'll start to see a lot of it, is just that whole concept of property titles. I mean, obviously it's not limited to property titles, but you know, we're talking about property in this space.
Yeah, totally.
And actually, the way it will work in the future, and I'm kind of jumping forward a bit here because we will talk about it, but the way loans and everything work right now, it's all just with legal promises by your lawyer, right?
Yep.
And so they will transfer title through a legal promise if the other person's lawyer promises to pay the money. Well, with blockchain, you don't need any of that. It will happen automatically.
Yeah, so that pretty much the middleman. We're talking about not having a middleman in place, right? Because it has directly one-to-one or one-to-many, depending on how it's set up.
Exactly, and we might as well just go there now. But if we think about how anything works, we're talking about before blockchain being the internet of distrust. Well, at the moment, we have to have institutions who are a place of trust. Things like banks, or like I said before, Land Information New Zealand, or governments, or Visa, or whatever. There's always some institute that's in the middle, and they are that trust factor. But more and more, a lot of these institutions are becoming corrupt.
Yep.
Or they get to make their own rules, which aren't always fair on us. So I actually I used to work for a company that manages Airbnb properties. And if you had a problem, you had to talk directly to Airbnb. And if they made a decision, they were judge, jury, executioner. You couldn't question their decision. It was fucking bullshit.
Yep.
Don't know, you might have to X-rate this podcast now. But it was absolute bullshit. And it was like, there is no one else I can go to. Well, in the future, Airbnb are just a middleman themselves, really. They're a platform, but they're still a middleman. So in the future, all those will disappear. Real estate agents are middlemen. They're or middlewomen. They're just facilitating a transaction, right? Mortgage brokers, just middlemen. All of these people who are just there to transact or to create a transaction, to make a transaction happen, they're going to disappear because they're no longer needed. Anyone who's there simply to create trust is going to disappear. And, we've talked about banks. Banks take my money and then lend it to you for a higher interest rate than what they pay me, right?
Correct.
We won't get into the full nitty gritty on how banks work, but in the simplest term, that's what happens. Whereas why do I'm still taking on the same amount of risk. I'm still putting in my money and it's getting lent to you. Why can't I get the full value of lending to you, right? And so this is where banks are completely going to either change or just become redundant as we move through decentralized finance, which means we could have blockchain banks, and they are starting to happen. Banks, probably the wrong word, but it's the closest to what we know today. Again, I apologize to anyone watching this in 10 years' time going, what's a bank? But, but this whole idea that there's all this money just floating there sitting on blockchain that could be pooled, used as a mortgage, used as finance. And again, I don't have to jump through hoops like I have to. The last mortgage you applied for, how much of a nightmare was that? They wanted to know what you had for breakfast, how much you're spending on your...
don't even want to know, man. Just ridiculous. Paperwork on paperwork on paperwork. And the worst of all is, as an investor, you might be doing an application more than once a year. You might be doing more regularly. And you go back to a bank 2 months later and they go, oh, can you fill this out? And it's like, excuse me. And Karen's laughing because he knows his feelings. It's like, I just did this 2 weeks ago, and I gave you all this stuff. Yeah, nothing's changed. I haven't changed color. I haven't grown my hair out. I haven't changed jobs. Everything's still the same. And they're like, no, you've got to fill out this paperwork. So yes, removing that process in the property world would be amazing to fundamentally know that, I've got a property and Karen's got a property, and we directly go to each other going, I want to buy it. And this is how, it gets transferred.
So this actually probably perfectly segue into the next point, which is smart contracts. Yep. So imagine we have this pool of money sitting on the blockchain, and I want to buy a house, and by now we'll have digital assistants as well, right? I read an amazing post talking about, hey, I was scrolling on Facebook, or I was scrolling on the with
On the
devices,
gram.
whatever it was. Saw a house I was interested in buying or getting built. So my artificial intelligent assistant suddenly goes out and it like fills in all that paperwork on your behalf. How cool would that be? Fills it all in, signs up, agrees to it, blah, 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 blah. Next thing you know, like within a minute, the money's in your account. You've already signed all the documents to buy the house. And like this all happens in quarter of a second, right?
Yep.
Be absolutely amazing, but we're not there now. So to break it down into sort of today's terms, imagine so buying $100,000 property, there's $100,000 sitting in some blockchain bank, and I would sign a smart contract, which means it's self-executing. No lawyers, no nothing. I would sign it, and I would use my physical title, which is on the blockchain, so digital title, as security, which means the minute I don't repay the loan, it would automatically transfer. There's no mortgagee sales, none of this. It would just automatically transfer, and the blockchain would take it from my possession and give it to the possession of the blockchain bank or the mortgagor, mortgagor in this case. So that's quite exciting. Now, I don't plan to go bankrupt. So let's just say again, I'm buying a house from you, right? We wouldn't need a real estate agent.
Correct.
It would simply be, if we were to agree here and now, our artificial intelligence assistants would be listening to us. They would draw it all up. They would sign it on our behalfs. And then when we're ready, again, my artificial intelligence assistant would have secured the blockchain lending. It would just transfer. So at the moment, I mean, again, we're in New Zealand. New Zealand is one of the fastest to convert. Stay if push really comes to shove. Your lawyer will not like it, your banks will not like it, but it is possible, right? Here we're talking about you could actually do it within seconds, probably split seconds, really. And it just removes half those costs. I mean, you think about half your costs, conveyancing from a lawyer, the cost of bank loans, cost of getting finance, doing due diligence. Again, you have to actually pay the council in order to access a council file, whereas in the future, they'll all be, anything on the council file will be stored on the blockchain, which means anything that goes in and out is stored on the blockchain. Everyone can see it. I shouldn't have to pay to access that property's information. And I can get it instantly, and it's never going to disappear. There's not going to be any fires or floods or whatever seemed to happen in the council buildings throughout the 70s.
That's to anyone that's wondering why we're having a bit of a smile about the fire and the floods. It's very common in New Zealand, in the small country we have, that a lot of our council buildings in the 70s had fires and floods. So a lot of people's housing documentation disappeared. In some benefit, it's great, because it means that that building that you added on in the 90s that no one knows about, council can't tell you it's illegal because they don't have any plans. But it becomes a pain when you want to go to council to prove something or to show something and they don't have any paperwork. But anyway, but yeah, totally, you know, having the smart contracts and having real time, being able to process and do all that sort of stuff, I mean, it would be amazing. I mean, our property deals can take weeks for paperwork. Going to the banks, getting the applications, putting that contracts together, then going from one lawyer to the other lawyer, from you know, negotiating through that. Each time there's a hiccup, it can be weeks and weeks, it can be months and months, depending on how long the stipulations are before fundamentally the house transfers from me to someone else or from someone else to me. And having these smart contracts and totally secure would be great. So something I also wanted to talk about as well that you mentioned on your discussion was this whole thing about ownership to possession. This whole thing about, I think it was underpinning in the sense of, I want to get into a house. How do, in New Zealand right now, to anyone that's listening that's not from New Zealand, our housing market is going ballistic. It's going crazy. The expectation for a first-time home buyer in Auckland, one of the biggest cities in New Zealand, the average house price is $1.2 million. You need 20% cash deposit. That means you need to have $240,000 cash in the bank. Now, no one has $240,000 cash in the bank to buy a house. And So this is where we looked at as blockchain could be a possibility of getting people to assist you in you paying them money from them assisting you with their money so you can buy a house and sort of crowdfunding as well.
So yeah, you're bang on point, and I think one of the questions which is really going to start to come up, or the lines are going to really blur on, is what is ownership and what is possession.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the moment, I always ask people if you own property, and people say, oh no, because the bank owns it and blah blah blah, and I'd always correct them. Well, actually, no, that's not correct. The bank controls your property by putting a mortgage on the title, and all this, but as we start to see decentralized finance and as we start to see new ways of ownership coming through, I think it's going to really change the way we do own or live or possess property. So as you were saying before, right? Imagine $1.2 million property and I want to come in and buy it. I've only got a 10% deposit. I mean, fuck if I'm lucky and, first home buyer with $120,000 deposit, boom, thanks mom and dad. But how am I going to do it? So it might be that property is actually broken up into smaller pieces. Multiple people buy those pieces, and then I actually, instead of paying a mortgage, I pay rent or some sort of lease or license or whatever in order to occupy the property and ensure that the other people who have bought and own it would get a decent return on their money, whilst I'm able to actually, slowly buy them off.
Yep.
So to give you an example, this is actually completely possible now. I was looking at a property. I had a dream. I have a dream. It was this crazy dream, and there's an island for sale. In fact, I think it's still for sale. Pepin Island down in Nelson. And they want about 16 million New Zealand dollars for it, plus GST.
Not much.
And not too much, penny change. But I did the numbers, and I'd have to try to remember them. Essentially, we looked at saying, could we actually take this entire island and break it down into 1 square meter sections or tokens?
Yeah.
And issue a secured token for everyone who wants to own 1 square meter of the island. And we worked out it was going to be about $4.50 in order to own 1 square meter of that island. So we could go out there and sell, all these tokens. I can't remember how many it was. I'd have to do those numbers.
It'll be a crazy amount, because $4.50 going into 16 million, right? So at 16 million divided by 4.5, so you're talking about
around about 4 million, right?
Yeah, 3.4, 3.5. Million.
I remember it was about 560 hectares. So I had to work out how many 560 hectares was in square meters, and then work it out from there. So I mean, but that sounds crazy, but then crazier things have happened, right? To have a few, it's about 4 million people paying $4.50 to own it. And that's the way we'll start to see things going. I've been talking and working with some partners on an idea of fractional ownership of luxury property around the world. We called it Global Lifestyle Club. And we hadn't quite figured out how to get it started. And when ICOs were really taking off, so initial coin offerings, we were looking at that, but we were really surprised that no property ICOs seemed to really hit their target or take off. And now ICOs, they've sort of been around the block a bit, and they've become very much just a utility token. So that is you're essentially buying the company's local currency to use within that company. But now there's a new thing called securitized token offering, STO. And I was like, this is absolutely what we should be using. So imagine one currency, you just pay, you pay in, you own a square meter of a portfolio of properties, and we go around the world and we buy up luxury properties in really nice locations,
Yep.
and you own a piece of that.
Yep.
And that's now possible. So unfortunately, because of COVID, no one wants luxury properties around the world to travel to and stay in. And we're like, we'll put this on hold, but at least now we've got the answer of how we do it. So I'm really excited by that one, especially once we're able to start traveling a bit more. But that probably leads us into the final point, right?
I was just going to say that leads us so well into the final point, because fundamentally, to anyone listening to what Karen just said, is you buying at that point, you buying a share or portion into that property journey, or that property company that owns all those multiple properties, and you own, like you said, 1 square meter, which means you might be 0.1 of a share within the company that has, and so forth. And this, as you said, this leads us straight into the next thing about how property and the real estate market will become very similar to each other in a weird way. And I'll let you explain this.
The stock market. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's almost the direction it's all going, because if you think about it, the share market is really just selling portions of a company.
Correct.
And a STO really is just selling portions of a property.
Yeah.
And we've already seen coin exchanges pop up, and a STO can be listed on a coin exchange. And the big problem, as we know in crypto at the moment, is the volatility.
Yep.
Just up, down, up, down, up, down, whereas property is usually a lot more stable. But also the big problem with property is that, for example, Pepin Island, $16 million property, has been on the market for 2 years already. Like you can sell the whole property or nothing. You've got no choice.
Yeah.
Or how many people out there have to sell their house? Let's say they've got a $500,000 house. They need $50,000. And so they have to sell their entire house in order to get that. Yep. Well, in this case, once you're able to break that property down into smaller parts, into shares, into tokens, whatever we want to call it, and put it on an exchange where anyone else can buy it, well, you can actually sell down parts of your house and raise that money to go and do whatever you needed with that 50,000 instead of selling it. Or you could, it completely, the property market is very slow compared to the share market, right? So now it could completely speed that up. We've already talked about speed of transaction, but if it is announced that, I don't know, if there's some big motorway going to go in, which is going to make all of this new area accessible, well, those properties in those areas would go up instantly. Whereas at the moment, it's like, oh, how long is it going to take? We see it take months, sometimes even years for it to filter through. It's completely, it's not a fair market. So someone can come in and manipulate someone in order to be able to get a better price. Or if you're a better negotiator, if you just don't have a good agent on your side, all of that disappears. And it's like, no, this is the stock standard price, right? Because someone else is going to be bidding for your share more than someone else. Exactly the same way the stock market works. So it's going to be interesting how that looks like. I don't quite know, but I do know there are a number of people around the world starting to work on that. And what it also does is it pretty much opens up the entire global property market to be able to be traded in one place, which is super exciting as well. And without the risk. You think if I was to go over to India and try invest in a property in India, I don't even want to imagine what that would be like. If I could just put some shares into a property in India and someone else is managing it, I don't know what that would look like, whether it's like Body Corp or a portfolio manager or who knows, right? But at least I don't have that risk.
Totally. How many people go and buy? There's a platform in I said South Africa. You said South Africa earlier. I don't know why I said that, but there's a company in New Zealand at the moment called Sharesies, which literally allows you to buy single shares, or I think even part of single shares, depending on how much you want to spend. So if you want to spend 50 cents today, you can buy 50 cents worth of a share. That model on a property, so people sit there, go, I want to invest in property. No, you don't have to spend $1.2 million to buy a piece of grass and a shed in it. Pretty much what in Auckland at the moment, you can go and spend your $50 which you have, and you get, 1/1000th of a share of that 1 square meter we spoke about. And you get the same effects of what a share market would do. So if the property goes up, your portion goes up as well, and so forth. I think it'll be super cool. I think it'll be amazing to do that. But as Karen said, is how it is pulled together will be really interesting. Is how the legislation behind it, how it's guided. You can't just leave property and expect it to be okay a year later. Proper houses need to be looked after. Like if you leave a house for 10 years, it's like if you leave a block of gold for 10 years, it might not be as shiny, but it's still a block of gold. If you leave a house for 10 years and no one does anything to it, it ain't going to be a house 10 years later, especially in New Zealand. The weather's going to take the shit out of it. The trees are growing through it and everything, and the wild animals are in there. But, yeah, that ain't going to be a property in 10 years' time. So how they control that would be really interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's definitely going to be a wild ride. And like I said, as a futurist, everything I look at within the real estate market, I think blockchain is going to be the biggest disruptor, hands down. So if you are in property, that's the one thing you should be researching and educating yourself on.
That's awesome, Karen. And, thanks so much for that and to go through it. And like I said, it's something so unique, something so different. We're talking about it now and people are listening going, hey, as much as it sounds cool as, because Karen's a futurist, thinking forward, going, it's coming. And as you joked in the beginning of it, in 10 years' time, when someone looks back at this and they go, oh, what are you talking about? That's normal practice we do today. That's how some of this stuff involves. And if you want to be ahead of it, or we want to have an understanding, look into it now. The moment is now. The moment is coming this year into next year of how this can change somewhere else in the world or even a little bit in New Zealand, and we see how it will affect us. So don't be left behind in this opportunity. But at the end, I just wanted to say thank you, Karen, for, as always, coming on the show. We're talking about some great and interesting topics. If you love what we have to say today, make sure you go back into some of my old episodes where I've had Karen on. We talk about tiny homes and living in 20, 25 square meter houses and how's that put together as well. So make sure you look out for that content. But as always, as I said at the end of the show, make sure you take something from today's show. Make sure you take something, you learn from it. You get inspired by it to educate yourself more in areas that could benefit yourself on your property journey, your knowledge journey, or on your life journey. Because at the moment, in a time we live in, we need things to help us. We need things to inspire us, to help us smile, laugh, and be silly more often. To anyone who knows myself and Karen, we can't be around each other too long because shit breaks. We're laughing like kids in a corner, and it's always amazing. That's the sort of stuff that you need to look in your life for more often. But at the end of the day, make sure you stay safe. Make sure you stay beautiful out there. Until next time, see ya.